And hi, Martha. It's so wonderful to be with you virtually. And
Yes.
congratulations on your publication day. It is a joy and an honor to get to be here with you and celebrate the accomplishment of your fifth novel, An Elegant Women, which follows 4 generations of women with astounding compassion and honesty and insight. So, for those of you watching, and I know we're really lucky to have an enormous group of Martha fans here, of which I am one, absolutely. I wanted to let you know that Martha and I are going to have a conversation together, and then we're going to open up to your questions at 8:15. But please do submit any questions you have, as Melanie said, using the Ask a Question prompt at the bottom of your screen. And there's also, as Melanie said, there's a chat function on the right side of the screen, and I'm going to use that now to add a list of recommended anti-racist reading. We're all here gathered in celebration of the power of the written word. And I hope that as you buy Martha's new novel from the Center for Fiction, you also get yourself a ton of books, including titles off this list. Get a stack. So, Martha, how are you feeling on this publication day? I know you've had, 4 previous publishing experiences. How does this launch day compare? How are you doing?
It has nothing in common. Well, I'm feeling very excited about my novel. It took a long time, to make it. But of course, I'm so deeply saddened about where we are right now. And, it was one thing to think about the pandemic and be coming down, the road toward the publication with that in my mind. And then, now with the protests, and it's so very terrible and very sad. And, so I'm not thinking a whole lot about myself. I'm thinking a lot about other things and what more I can do, and my incredible sisters, my sister Jenny, who has a website, jennymcphee.com, where she has just the best blogs about things that we can be doing much better. And another sister, Joan, out in Los Angeles, a long time ago at this point now, back in May, sent an email to her sisters, to us, saying, let's all be co-conspirators. And I'm thinking a lot about that right now. It's a clip of Bettina Love, who's an educator and a writer, and has a book, We Want to Do More Than Survive. And in this clip, she's speaking with 2 other women about the difference between being an ally and being a co-conspirator. And the ally knows everything and has done really good work and reading, but the co-conspirator is the person out there serving as the human shield to make, to help protect Black people. And I'm thinking of ways that I might be able to do better, and pay more attention and be a co-conspirator. But I'm also thinking simultaneously of my novel. It's here, and I'm thrilled, and I'm so honored to be at the Center for Fiction and to be talking with you. I am a huge fan of you, of Disappearing Earth, and so this is, a lovely occasion. So I'm trying to think of both things at the same time.
That makes me, everything you say is so thrilling and so galvanizing, and it seems like in some ways it feels so funny to be here together. Funny is not quite the right word, but odd to be here together in the joy of this moment. And at the same time, your book is an American epic that covers a century of pain and of growth and of doing more than surviving, of living and thriving. And it seems like, as I hear you talk about, the how we move from just thinking about a thing or just learning about a thing to actually acting and making our actualizing what we're, change in the world. The symbol of a book turning from a manuscript that you've been working on in private into an object in the world that you're sharing with people seems like a potent one. You are also turning something into a real thing in the world, which is very exciting.
Yeah, it is. It's
maybe,
true.
maybe let's be co-conspirators. I like that pledge
Yes.
a lot.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about An Elegant Woman. Would you tell us a little bit in your own words of what the book's about, and on the heels of all my raves about it? And would you mind reading a bit from it?
Absolutely. So the book, my very brief kind of elevator pitch or soundbite is that it's the story of a woman's life against the backdrop of the 20th century. It's the story of sisters and mothers and daughters and granddaughters, and about what they've done to make their lives again across time and geography. It's also about myths and family myths and legends and the stories and lies we tell ourselves. And it's very much the jumping off point for the novel is my grandmother's life story, her story. And in wanting to tell her story, I sort of used the novel to inhabit stories that she had told me and to find ways to, animate them through fiction. So I will read, I'm going to read two brief passages from the opening of the novel, and then from one from the opening and then one from the second chapter. And I have not yet mastered reading virtually, but or in this situation, but I will give it a good shot. What would you like when I'm dead and gone? It's the title of the first chapter. For as long as I could remember, my grandmother was dying and telling stories. I'm just a candle in the wind, she would say, and clutch her heart, sighing audibly. I'm just an old, threadbare mule going round and round the katydid. She grew up in Montana, but a long road had deposited her in a Gunquit, Maine, and into a yellow Victorian she had christened, after my grandfather died, in a moment of virtuosic melodrama last morrow. My grandmother had snow-white hair that she wore like a crown. Her exacting eyes were a startling emerald. Her large, sturdy frame seemed a fitting home for her strong opinions. She dressed impeccably in tailored suits, wore motoring gloves, netted hats, diamonds from Tiffany's. Her snakeskin pocketbook fastened with a golden clasp, and when opened, the cinnamon scent of dentine wafted from within. On the dashboard of her black Lincoln Continental was a golden nameplate that read, Mrs. Charles Mitchell Brown, another name in a long line of borrowed names. She was Tommy, she was Catherine, she was Mother, she was Mrs. Brown, she was Aunt Thelma, she was Grammy. She wanted to live forever, or at least outlive Nancy Cooper Slagle, her great-grandmother, who lived to be 104 years old. In the scheme of things, Grammy almost made it. She lived and lived and lived, despite all the clutching of her chest, the rolling back of her eyes, the repetition of that candle in the wind. Her own imminent demise became another yarn to spin. But she lived on and on. My sister Scarlett, deadpan but admiring just the same, called her a blowtorch in the wind. To protect against oblivion, the methods of two ancient Greek historians compete. Thucydides, the dominant example, tracked people down and interviewed them, took notes, recorded facts. And Herodotus, the long discredited fabulist whose allegiance was to a good yarn, sometimes involving gods walking among the place, giving a nudge to events. The thing about Herodotus is that you don't need paper. You just need to keep talking. And on the backs of a multitude of voices, the narrative is carried, like the soft shirt rustle of an afternoon breeze across eternity. When my three older sisters and I would visit Grammy would take us on tours of Last Mara, showing us the melodeon that had been around the horn twice, a china bowl belonging to Nancy Cooper Slagle, cousin of James Fenimore Cooper, she would say, telling us how Nancy had carried the bowl over the Allegheny Mountains as she fled the Confederate South during the Civil War. Her husband had died in Libby prison, leaving her penniless, a Yankee widow with 7 children. She carried the bowl given to her as a wedding present from Richmond to the safety of her husband's family in Ohio. Grammy wanted us to hear these things. She would pause in her stories, ask one of us girls to get her smelling salts. I feel faint, she would say, and from her vanity, one of us would snatch the small silver container filled with ammonia, so she'd keep telling her stories. With a sniff of it, she'd sit up straight again, the bulk of her with those green eyes that could hold a child mid-breath between the future and the past. I'm not long for this world, she'd say like a prophet. You need to know from where you came and to whom you belong. That was the sound of history. This is the sound of history. Like the catalog of ships in the Iliad, you are not expected to remember particular names, only the sound of the names rolling along as you listen to the poem. Every history is a song, and this is what ours sounds like. And then I'm just going to read briefly from chapter 2 to give a flavor of inhabiting the grandmother's story. It's called Magic City. 2 sisters, one beautiful, the other not. Little girls 5 and 3 years old. They wore red velvet Christmas dresses and rabbit furs, waiting on the platform with their mother and her violin for the train that would take them from Ohio to Billings, Magic City, as it was called, because it blossomed overnight. They were running away from father. It was January, cold. A black trunk stood between them, brass-buckled, leather-strapped, more suited for an ocean liner, wheels at the corners, almost too heavy for the 3 to lift. They didn't bring much. Summer dresses, white linen, eyelet, and lace, lovely and impractical, which made the girls wonder if it might be warm where they were headed. An iron, rosin for the bow, ribbons for their hair, family keepsakes, a Cantonese wedding bowl, Temple's notes to Shakespeare, belonging to mother's grandmother, Nancy Cooper Slagle, a reminder of to whom they belonged and from where they came. The eldest of the 2 girls, my grandmother, pudgy and round, considered herself mostly 6. Thelma Madeline Stewart was named for the title character of a best-selling novel by Marie Corelli. Her middle name was for one of mother's sisters who died of sepsis when she was 7, a notion that scared Thelma, afraid the fate might befall her. Thelma had always been called Tommy, like a boy, as mother would say, as if that were better, and sometimes Tommy thought it might be. The younger girl was Catherine, etched delicately as filigree, named for queens. Way back there, at the beginning of it all, Tommy stood with her arms long at her side, shivering, her green eyes studying the dark morning, the lonely track shooting out ahead and behind, the gray, smoky light and the quiet rectangle of the depot against the widening sky, snow on the ground, her breath making clouds. A tired dog lumbered along, leaving prints in the snow, and Tommy imagined the dog was heading home. She waited for the sound of the train, hoping that her father might just appear in time to stop them, wondering what would become of them if he didn't. In her purse, mother held $100, had counted it out for the girls, wanting them to know that she'd saved it over the last year, that you couldn't buy anything for $100, but that she intended to buy a new life. The money had dazzled Tommy, paper and coins tucked powerfully now in mother's purse. She had sewn some extra coins that Tommy imagined were worth a lot, a private stash for emergencies, into the hem of her dress, so if thieves tried to steal from them, they'd have insurance. Quiet, mother snapped, making Tommy flinch, though she hadn't said a word. A telegrapher for the railroads, father kept travel passes which mother had stolen from him. She was going to the drier climate to cure her tuberculosis, an illness that she did not have. They had left him at the crack of dawn, asleep in bed with his lover. He has a wandering eye, mother had said to Tommy. Mother filched the passes, sent the trunk to the terminal the day before, left a note stating that the drier climate would be better for her health. I'm as strong as an ox, she said to Tommy, but he doesn't need to know. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, even you're stopping there. I have so many questions I want to ask about what you just read. As you read, I just kept thinking, oh, the book is so extraordinarily beautiful. And I know you mentioned it is inspired by your own family history, by your grandmother's life and stories. It's narrated by a character who's a novelist herself. And you mentioned how long am I right that you spent past 10 years working on this? Is that?
I probably spent my entire life working on this book. This is the book I wanted to write since I knew I wanted to be a writer. But it's been 10 years since I published my last novel.
Oh my goodness. This is the book of your heart. This is the book of your...
It is. This is the book of my heart.
So
Yes.
what motivated that? What made this book catch for you so young and become the book that you always wanted to write? What motivated your choice to draw on your family stories and writing it?
Well, I was very close with my grandmother, and she was a yarn spinner. She would tell stories all the time, and they were long, elaborate stories about Nancy Cooper Slagle, whose husband died in Libby prison, and crossing the Alleghenies with 7 children. Baby Teresa tied to her chest, newborn, and died and was buried at the edge of the trail. And these stories of women working their way. We were descended from Mary, Queen of Scots, according to Grammy, and they were always women, and they were always doing intrepid things. And my great grandmother, her mother, leaving her husband and going to Montana and figuring out how to survive with 2 kids. And basically she did it by leaving them alone a lot of the time to raise themselves. But these stories were with me, and they seemed to me, they evolved over time. And I have my journals from when I was, first starting to write, even just around the time I was thinking of novels and the like, and stories. And they're filled with notes about my grandmother and things that she's saying, stories she's telling me. And when I started to write my first novel, it was this one, but I was too young. I didn't understand why she was. First of all, I didn't even know how much was fact or fiction at that point. I just thought, oh, we're related to Buster Brown. I was telling friends, when my kids were in school, that I was descended from Buster Brown. It wasn't true. I didn't know that yet. So I didn't yet have the tools to sort out what was what. And I also, hadn't started asking the questions of why was she telling me about all these really strong, these people, these women that were, why were the narratives always about women? I didn't question anything. I wasn't able to question yet. But they were certainly sitting in there. And in fact, when I sold a novel along the way, it was a 2-book deal, and it was the sentence for the second book was just 1 sentence, and it was the story of a woman's life across the 20th century. But I wrote Dear Money instead. So it took me a very long time to get here. But they were stories that made me think about these women and about a woman's life against big history. When we read the history books, we're reading about men primarily, and we're reading about famous people. And I was interested in how our narrative always seemed to touch every big event in American history. But it was some woman who was doing something to survive. And she would have been lost had Grammy not been carrying these stories down. And some of them, as I became older, I realized that they were, that it is a kind of oral tradition, and she was embellishing and adding on, and they were evolving, but there was also probably some kernel, of truth that launched the tale in the first place. And that got me going. And I am here in my childhood home. I am here in the room that my grandmother lived in when she was the last years of her life after she left Maine and came to live in New Jersey, and then was, I'm here, and the room is surrounded by ancestors, and even I am on the wall already, an ancestor. So yeah, it's sort of funny to be here right now. It's sort of wonderful, but also, yeah.
I love how enthralling and, life absorbing seeking or trying to tease out that kernel of truth from the myth making was for you, and how it motivated the writing of the book and the development of yourself over so long. I can only imagine how exciting it must have been to hear these stories from your Grammy, because as your reader, it was so exciting to me to read and think about, the kernels of truth, or that there was a kind of like narrative, fictional truth that you were creating, and you're also drawing on some facts, and you're also drawing on some historical records. It was so fascinating to me. And I think the book says so much about the ways that we construct narratives, the way everyone tells themselves certain things about their family members or themselves, and the way that writers in particular spin stories about the world in order to make sense of it. I loved this quote that at one point a character says, "Here is a lesson I learned a very long time ago. Narrative is everything. Own your narrative, whatever you want it to be. We create our own origin stories, our myths, and we believe them, and then others believe them, and then they are the truth." So I wanted to ask you yourself, the factual person in front of us, do you think this character is right? And how do you think about the relationship between truth and fiction, or between fact and story? When you sit, you think of yourself as a novelist, I imagine.
Oh,
and,
yes.
And
oh,
when you
definitely.
sit down,
I couldn't do this as nonfiction. Including my dad would not be proud. Not at all. Because I like facts a lot. Believe me, especially in these days, I really love facts. But in fiction and storytelling, I like them as, as a guide to, like I want things to be real. I want them to appear real. And so I want to know why were, why was my grandmother's mother taking her to Montana? And so, because she left me little breadcrumbs of stories, but I had to figure out the context. And that's where, for me, fact comes in. So it was the Enlarged Homestead Act of 1909 was drawing people out west. They needed to populate the land so that the railroads could go through to the could have places to stop, and they needed to build it up. So they did the Enlarged Homestead Act. And so learning all of that stuff about dry farming technique and all of the details of what it was like to live in Montana, all of that stuff was fuel for my imagination, and gave it a place to to go. And I loved all that. In terms of that character, that's in that's the current Colonel Simmons, and he is. It's a scene where where the central character, it has been sort of hiding her past, her impoverished childhood, and he's caught her out, and he's telling her basically, own your story, own it, be it, and then you can make of your narrative anything you want. And
I'm
she
looking at
does.
it in my book right now.
Oh yeah, she does. She listens to him, and after that, she owns her childhood in Montana, and I think that is important to her, because she wants, there's some aspect of her that wants to become, or maybe it's the entire aspect of her, a myth herself, a legend. And this is part of that legend making. I was an impoverished child, girl. I raised my sister. I wore gunny sacks for shoes in the winter. I skinned coyotes, and I made it out of there, to here, to driving my Lincoln Continental and having my diamonds, and to becoming an elegant woman. So it was part of her myth making. And I think he the Colonel in that scene is allowing her to do that.
And I love in that scene, I'm looking at it again now, how they connect through that, and yet we don't forget how different they are too. That you write, somewhere she understood that his stories weren't secrets. They were facts known about his life, but cushioned by time and obliterated by good fortune. It didn't matter for him now, and he was a man. And it's so efficiently said, like, it matters for her, and she's a woman, and
Yes.
that's a different position that she's operating from.
Exactly. There weren't as many options for women to be able to transform themselves.
Yeah, I love, we see this particular kind of personal storytelling in these characters over and over through the generations you're following. So the women in the novel keep presenting themselves as new people. They have, like you said, royal family trees or falsified credentials or different names in order to elevate their positions, in order to become the elegant women that they would like to be. At one point, someone says, no one's name was as it was supposed to be because everyone, it seemed, wanted to be someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, what do you think motivates this personal myth making for your characters or for ourselves even? When you write about, why is it important to you to write about the efforts it takes to become somebody other than who we might have been supposed to be?
I think that, it's complicated. Like, what does it mean to be alive? And what does it mean to have been, to be here and to, I think, look at all this stuff on genealogy. Everybody wants to know where they come from. And, and I think this character too is concerned with where everybody's going as well. And where are we coming from and where are we going? And she my character wants to get out of Montana. She wants to make something for herself. She's driven and determined and tenacious, and she'll do what it takes to get there. And if it means taking her sister's name, heading to New York to become, a nurse, and meeting, the right husband, or doing all that, she's going to do what it takes. And for in that time there weren't a whole lot of options, and so that's important. That was important to her. But then further, it's this idea of dealing with your own mortality. And what are we leaving behind, and who are we, and what are we? And my grandmother and this character did that by turning herself into a myth, and by creating these stories. She talked nonstop, my grandmother, about all of the stories I didn't even get to in the novel. I mean, she was a storyteller, and it was all about her existence. And it seems to me that, and not just her existence, but my existence. This is who I was supposed to be. And I guess it's that desire. Why do we keep journals? It's you want to leave something, you want to leave a trace. I was here. The cave paintings at Lisco, that's the way I see it.
Or you can depict yourself as a great hunter, maybe.
Yeah.
In the cave painting, she depicts herself as an
elegant woman.
An elegant woman.
Right.
Wait, Martha, you said something before that I can't stop thinking about,
Oh, no.
which is that your dad would be so mad if you were not the novelist. I know your sisters and your dad are like virtually with us tonight. Is that
They better
right?
be.
They better be. And you're also going to be in conversation with your sisters Jenny and Laura at different events as this tour continues. And your whole family is writers and artists, it seems.
We are.
And I wonder how you all navigate sharing work with such intimate personal roots with the world. Like, are there things that you would kill each other if you wrote about, or are there?
Oh, definitely.
Nothing off.
And I know what they are. and I stay far away from them. My father would kill me because he's so rooted. I mean, it has to have happened exactly the way, and I just am not good at that. I I guess I'm a liar by nature. I don't need to, adhere to the fact in the same way. That's why I'm a fiction writer. My sisters are, they're so talented, all in all these different ways, but also in this one general way. And our mother was a photographer. She's still alive, but she has dementia. And she was a beautiful portrait photographer in Princeton. And when my parents separated, she she had been a housewife, but then she took on this job as a portrait photographer. And I think every home in Princeton has a beautiful photograph or many of my mother's. And so we grew up, thinking about with, dad writing all these books. And I recently have found all letters from him to me as a child, and he's constantly talking about the books and that we're not understanding, the stresses. They're all very funny and loving, but I can see, it's a weird thing for a child to have an artist as a parent, and I see that with my own children. They think that I'm just lying around doing nothing all the time, but it's good I have a book right now, because now they actually know that I've been doing something. But yeah, with so we grew up in that way, and my I'm the one that most directly seems to use the family, like most directly, but we all do. In fact, Laura has a body of work that she's doing right now, set in the West. She's a stunning landscape photographer, but she's going to every place my great grandmother lived, and so that will be part of our conversation. But yeah, I mean, I think it is interesting because we do have all this source material and we use it in such different ways. And we also all know what it means to live a creative life. And that is very helpful because it's odd.
They know that when you seem to be lying around doing nothing, you're not lying around doing it. It's all part of the process.
Yeah, they do. They know that.
By the way, there are folks in the chat right now who are saying that your mom took their wedding pics. All their family photos were taken by. It's so beautiful, so beautiful.
She's an exquisite photographer.
I love that your sister is going to all the places that were traveled to by your great grandmother, because the characters in your book really crisscross the country and are going from Ohio to Montana. They go to California, New York, Maine, New Jersey.
She's primarily interested in my great grandmother and her career. Oops, are you there?
Oh, we're still here. We still have you.
Oh, okay. It suddenly vanished. Oh, technology.
This is the magic of virtual events.
It's the magic funny, but there we go. Okay. Sorry. She's primarily interested in my great grandmother, and her career as an itinerant school teacher.
And that is that your great grandmother over your shoulder? Is that right?
Yes, Glenna. There's Glenna. Yeah, I kept their names. I didn't change them because they seemed like fictional characters to me anyway. But that is her name, and that's the not the girl, obviously, the older lady. Yeah, so she's traveling. She's been doing this for a long time. I don't know how long, but maybe 4 years or so. And I know they'll be stunning, and I haven't actually seen them yet. But it's a way to look at now and then. And again, it goes back to that, to that understanding. My sister Sarah, who's an art historian, has, after reading my novel, so I like to take claim for this, and she is she likes facts. So, and she's an art historian, so she knows how to get deep down into archives. She's going deep into archival research to figure out our family tree. And that's, it's sort of, it's interesting to see her do that.
It's fascinating. Tracing it all the way back to Mary Queen of
Mary
Scots.
Queen of Scots, yeah. If she gets there, she gets the golden egg.
Do you think the kind of self-invention that your characters do, or that your real great-grandmother Glenna did in going to, in her itinerant school teaching, and I imagine, I'm certainly the character of Glenna in the book gives herself credentials that she doesn't have, and do you think that is a particularly American quality, or do you think, is it a particularly, I don't know, female quality, or is it just how humans are?
Well, I think it's part of the American narrative, certainly, but I'm sure I know people, enhance their biographies the world over.
Yeah.
But in terms of that, Horatio Alger, pick yourself up by the bootstraps kind of story, it's definitely very American, story. And we can think of a lot, like The Great Gatsby. I mean, you can think of so many stories where there is that sort of lying to get ahead. And I mean, even today you look around at most recently the scandal in SAT and college, getting into colleges, all that stuff. And, these people who have everything still trying to do it because there's the perception that you can get ahead with a better education. And if they're children, it's such a complicated story. But part of that were, people from China were a part of that, and people from other parts of the world. But I think that it is but I think it certainly has a reputation of being a very American story. And I'm trying to think of, I'm sure there are dozens of them, of women going off and trying, to, better themselves in that same kind of way. And the only one that's coming to mind, and I'm sure it's just my brain right now, and maybe in the chat people could think of a lot of other ones, but is Sister Carrie. But things don't end so well for her. But not that they end well for Jay Gadsby either. So
no, it's complicated.
Yeah.
Not a clear win for anyone, I guess, outside Horatio Alger narratives.
Yeah,
it's a little. We're in a couple of minutes. We're going to open up our conversation to questions from everybody, and I see that already there's some questions in there. I just want to bring everyone's attention again. If you have a question for Martha, you can put it in the Ask a Question kind of prompt at the bottom of the screen, and I'll start asking you those in a couple of minutes. But
okay.
Before we do, so I was wondering if you have any advice for us. I imagine a book coming out at any time is stressful. A book coming out after 10 years is stressful, although maybe you're much more even-keeled than I am. And a pandemic, I was wondering if you have things that you're diving into or that are sort of giving you life right now, or giving you comfort and motivating you to move forward. I know you already gave us all a recipe for a cocktail, which is a really good.
Mine's sitting right over here. I dare not break it.
So that's very important, a book-inspired cocktail. Yeah. But what are there things that you recommend that we pick up or do or dive into, or things that you're finding that you're picking up or doing or diving into a lot these days?
So, when the pandemic came out, I thought, and, I knew the novel was coming out, debate about whether to postpone it, and then no, and yes, no, yes, and no. At first I was, I was so scared, and then I came down here to New Jersey. I've been here since March, since mid-March, and I started to become bold in a way that I haven't. I don't generally ask for help. I don't generally I try to just do my own thing. And I feel like it's time to both ask for help and to be generous.
Mm.
And those are the two things that I keep thinking about. And I feel that even more now with the protests.
Yes.
And yeah, read up. There's a great link in this chat, right, with all the books that we can read, and learn more. Act, act, act. There are countless ways we can act, and we can start to think, about what they are. JennyMcPhee.com. She's got 75 things that white people can all be doing better. Um, but I also want to say I've just found a lot of solace in reading. I so highly recommend your book. It's just so it's so beautiful, and so it's just so important about women's lives again. And I also, Valeria Luiselli's book, I've been reading slowly across the pandemic. And I want to be in a calm moment, and reading does make me calm, but I have to get there. But it calms me down. And,
Yeah.
and then lastly, I've been gardening like many, many Americans, I guess. There's been a run on seeds and chickens. And I'm doing both of those things.
Chickens, even.
Yeah, chickens that are
Oh
going to
my
lay
gosh.
blue eggs. They're going to
That
lay
sounds.
blue and olive colored eggs.
I think every single bit of that is the right way to proceed. Like reading Valeria Luiselli, acting for the good of our
We need
neighbors and our communities, and eating blue eggs. So all of those sound really good. I'm gonna. Oh, this is fabulous. So there's someone brings up in the questions the fantastic LA Times review that you got, I guess, just at the end of last week. Is that right?
Yeah.
And this person says the reviewer references a theme that runs throughout your books around the myth of social mobility in America. And I'd be curious to hear your reflections on the emergence and centrality of this theme in your writing. So what do you think? The myth of social mobility, why is that? Does that pull you? Why does it pull
I
you?
guess I inherited that from my grandmother. But it's something that's always fascinated me. My first two novels aren't so much about that. I mean, the themes that interest me are family. I very much like exploring family structure, and I do that in all of my books in one way or another. And this book and the first two more than the L'America and Dear Money. But that notion, it's like, what do you do to make your life? And it seemed when I was writing Dear Money, it seemed that so many people were obsessed with real estate, and everybody having having what they couldn't afford, and I'm interested in that. There's tension in that for me, in that subject matter. And I wouldn't have necessarily been able to put it. I wouldn't have put it the way that the reviewer put it, but I was just so honored, and it made it. I liked being seen like that, because it is a theme in my work. And if I can't put it together, I love that he could for me, and I see what he's saying, and I like being called out like that.
I love family as the filter through which we sort of see the entire world. We see an entire society. And isn't it the best? A great book reviewer, there's like nothing better.
Oh no,
It's so exciting.
That was very exciting. That was, a writer's dream come true, or at least this writer's dream come true. He touched, I kept waiting for it to get bad, and I kept waiting for it to end, and it was long and fabulous. It never got bad. I was just so happy and moved by that review. It was a great piece of writing, too. And
Absolutely.
I love that. Yeah.
I'm thinking about, what we're seeing, the themes that are coming out, and the world you're building through sort of the tight focus on the family. Stacy has a really great question here. I noticed the language you used when addressing race and otherness in the book. Page 36, the first time you mentioned race in the book. Later, you mentioned how Tommy and Catherine were taught to never look a Black person in the eye. When the family lives on the reservation, Glenna is clearly aware of her position and how they're affected at every turn by class. You did this with such nuance. I'm wondering about what choices you considered as you wrote about race in the 20th century.
Oh, that's a great question. It's definitely part of the obviously the narrative, and I wanted to be I wanted to be true to the way that these people experienced race and their racism in their historic period. But I didn't want to be insensitive also, because do we need to listen to things over again? But I also didn't want to be too PC. I wanted it, so it was a delicate balance, and I tried to navigate that in a sensitive way. And I thought hard about it. And it's a topic that, as the book progresses, you can see becomes more important, but it's a tangent of the story that it remains unfinished in this book. I mean, the conversation that I want to continue and have is not finished yet. Let's put it that way.
I loved the specificity. To me, the way that you talk about and position these characters in their whiteness really shows your skill as a writer, and how this is not, these are not just like characters that are interchangeable with generally anyone else, which I can't imagine a character like that in any great book. But your characters are having a particular experience that comes from their whiteness, that comes from often their passing for educated or passing for wealthy. It's a very specific experience, and all the richer for that specificity.
It's their story, it is specific to to their time and their narrative arc. But look, we all have to be more conscious, and I'm not great about in talking about race, but I will say that Jess Rowe, his white flights was really. I mean, that came after this was finished, but he, when he points out that there are no, in all this, the great literature of, there are no Black people. It's that makes me sit up and pay attention. Like, so much is making me sit up and pay attention right now. And so I want to look at that. And I've a lot further to go.
This is part of our action, right? That lies ahead. Someone asked a lovely question, Martha, which is, do you see yourself in Grammy? What are some similarities or big differences? And I'm thinking about in the novelist character, the narrator in the opening of your book, talks about how in telling her grandmother's story, she realizes it's her own story too, that as she inhabits her grandmother, she learns about herself. Mm-hmm. And I wonder what you see, similarities, I guess, you see in your real life Grammy, or in your fictional Grammy too.
My grandmother is tenacious. She was, and I am. I don't do the whole. I mean, maybe my sisters are laughing, but I don't do the whole like self-invention thing. I don't. maybe I'm doing it in my fiction, but
You haven't changed your name multiple times, you haven't.
And I'm pretty, but I am tenacious, and I go after something and I will stick with it until I get it done. And that's, that is, that's my grandmother. It's my mother. It's actually all of us. We're all very, we're all determined people. And so I don't know. I have a lot. What feels most honest is that I have a lot of her in me that comes from all the love and protection. And she was a complicated character. My father hated her. He did not like her at all. But my and my sisters, we all had complicated relationships with her. But this narrative, that the telling of the stories, and this imagination, and she was I was the youngest, and for a long time, and when there was difficulties that life throws your way, she was always there for me, always ready to wrap me in her embrace. And she even said to me, she said, if I got into trouble once, and she said, she came from Maine to see me, and she said, you could murder and I would still love you. She really was. And that's the part of Grammy that I feel I have the most of, that embrace, more than being particularly like her, which.
That's a good quality to have, I think, to share. Someone has a fantastic question I think you touch on in the LA Times review, definitely touches on, and also you touch on in your narrative too, in the book. They ask, do you think in today's world of DNA results in the internet, this affects the license people take with their personal stories? In what way? How has myth-making changed in the age of social media? I know you've got Snapchat in your book. Or
so,
is it Snapchat or Instagram? It's Snapchat, right?
Oh, I don't even know what it's. What are they? It's my story.
Yes.
I still am trying to get it straight. It vanishes. It's whatever the one is that vanishes.
Yes.
Oh God. I definitely think it is. I'm no expert on the social media stuff, but it is, sometimes I just can't go on there because I just want to write, life sucks and this is awful and I'm miserable, but everybody's looking so great and they're with their, on their beach, right. And they're, and the kids are, I'm pointing out that way because, my children, their friends, and it just, nobody can ever look bad. But there is this Finstagram, I don't know. There is one where but then that's also, like, how bad can you look? So that's fake too. And so, I think that I think everybody's myth making now. It's an American syndrome.
Yes, I don't know if we're all still pursuing elegance. If we all ever were, I think some of us are pursuing elegance on social media for sure. And we're getting, I think, to the end, and I love this. Two folks asked questions that I think are really resonant with each other. So one person said, how do you find the story? What keeps you engaged from start to finish in the writing? And someone else says, I'm wondering if you can speak to the power of perseverance on this project. Ooh. So this is your lifetime book. How do you do that?
Oh, wow. We don't have the time for me to answer that one in full, but I will.
Right, you've got 4 minutes.
Just 4 minutes. This book did take perseverance. This book took a very long time. I had a false start. I had, lots of experience with disappointment along the way. I had to, I finished a draft that I thought was so smart and great. And my husband thought it was the best thing I ever did. And it wasn't. It was a mess. And I had to fix it. I had to go back. It took 3 more years. And I lost faith. And I will say a friend of mine, Mona Simpson, gave me the Stone Diaries. She recommended it. And she gave it as a recommendation in April. And by July, the book was finished after, all those years and all that sweat. And it just made me understand what I was trying to do with the voice. And so it's not just the novel, that the Stone Diaries, it's something unlocking you, and you only get there by going through all the stuff I went through. Some, you know, partly this took so long because I had teenage kids and my mother's got dementia, and I had a lot of stuff, but even through that, you have to keep finding the faith. And I talk to my sisters a lot, and my dad, and my husband, and they're very helpful, and they listen to me. So you just need to. I needed to just keep getting back in the saddle. Eventually, I would take long stretches where I really couldn't do anything, and I forget the other part of the question, but.
I think that's really what the question is all about perseverance, about going from the beginning of something to the
end, and
to
the stories that interest you along the way. There I did have something to say, which was, about the research. Kept me going a lot when I really couldn't do another sentence, or felt like I was completely blocked. Learning about the Enlarged Homestead Act, or learning about nursing in Brooklyn in 1929, or learning about the Colonel Simmons, or any of these things, the characters that created the book, or discovering that we're not related to James Fenimore Cooper, or Buster Brown. These things kept the imagination alive. So
I love this. I think we've come to the end of our time, and I don't think there's any better thing than we can do to be reminded of that we just keep going, and we keep pushing, and we grow along with the work we're trying to do, and reach the goal eventually.
Yes.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
So I think you're an inspiration to us. I think this book is an inspiration to us. I'm really grateful to you, Martha, for.
I'm so grateful to you. Thank you so much. What a joy. And I hope to meet you in real life.
In real life, one day, post-quarantine.
Yes.
Hi, Melanie.
Thank you so much, Julia. And thank you, Martha. And thanks all of you for joining us tonight. Don't forget to purchase An Elegant Woman. Yes, thank you, Julia. We'll see you again soon. Thanks, everyone.